Your mother put the plate down in front of you, and that was dinner. No menu, no options, no asking what anybody felt like eating. She already knew. She had known since Tuesday what Thursday would be, because the budget told her and the calendar confirmed it. One dinner further down this countdown was never once made with chicken, even though every family called it that. And another one showed up in church basements across the upper Midwest, under a name the rest of the country never used. These were the meals that kept a household running without a single recipe card or a cooking show. Here are 25 forgotten dinners from the 1950s that deserve a place at your table again. Number 25, beef stroganoff, not the fancy version from a restaurant menu. The 1950s version. You sliced cheap round steak into thin strips and browned them fast in a hot skillet with butter and sliced onions. Then you stirred in a can of cream of mushroom soup, a splash of Worcestershire, and a dollop of sour cream. The whole thing simmered for 15 minutes while you boiled egg noodles on the back burner. You poured the stroganoff over the noodles and set it on the table, and it looked like something from a magazine. Betty Crocker put this recipe in her cookbook, and suddenly every housewife in the Midwest was making it on Tuesday nights. The sour cream made it taste rich, the mushroom soup made it easy, and the cheap cut of beef made it possible on a budget that had no room for tenderloin. Number 24. Liver and onions. You either loved this meal or you sat at the table until bedtime staring at it. Calves liver sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in bacon drippings until the outside turned crisp and the inside stayed pink. The onions went in first, cooked low and slow until they turned golden and sweet, then piled on top of the liver like a blanket. Mothers served this once a week because liver was cheap and the doctor said it was good for your blood. Children pushed it around the plate. Fathers ate it without complaint. And grandmothers made it better than anyone because they knew the secret was not overcooking it. The moment liver went gray and tough, the meal was ruined. A good cook pulled it from the skillet while it still had give. Served with mashed potatoes and a glass of milk, this was a dinner that tasted like iron and obligation, and something close to love. Before we continue, for those of you who want these kinds of old recipes all collected in one place, I put together something called the Vintage Recipe Guide. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. That is the last you will hear of it. If it sounds like something you would use, it is right there. Now back to the list. Number 23. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable. Families called it Tuesday. You opened a jar of dried beef, tore it into shreds, and stirred it into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. That was it. You poured the whole thing over toast and ate it with a fork. Soldiers brought this recipe home from the service and kept making it because it was fast and cheap and it filled you up when nothing else in the pantry would. The beef was salty enough to season the entire sauce on its own. Some cooks added a pinch of black pepper or a shake of paprika, but most did not bother. 2 slices of toast, a ladle of creamed beef, and dinner was done in 10 minutes. It was the kind of meal nobody bragged about and everybody made. Number 22. American chop suey, elbow macaroni, ground beef, canned tomatoes, and a diced green pepper. That was the whole thing. You browned the beef, added the vegetables, stirred in the cooked noodles, and served it in bowls like pasta with ambition. In New England, they called it American chop suey. In the Midwest, it went by goulash. Down south, it barely had a name at all. The dish had nothing to do with Chinese cooking. The name stuck because anything tossed together fast with whatever you had counted as chop suey in the American imagination of the time. It tasted better the next day, reheated in a skillet with a little extra tomato stirred through. Most families made it once a week and never wrote down the recipe. Number 21. Hamburger gravy on biscuits. You browned ground beef in a skillet, sprinkled flour over the meat, and stirred in milk until you had a thick, pale gravy studded with crumbled hamburger. Salt, pepper, and nothing else. Then you split open a hot biscuit and spooned the gravy over both halves until it ran down the sides and pooled on the plate. Some families used canned biscuits. Others made them from scratch with lard and buttermilk. Either way, the meal took 15 minutes from cold skillet to table. This was payday minus 3 food. The kind of supper that used one ingredient stretched with flour and milk into something that stuck to your ribs and kept you full through the night. Men who worked road crews and factory floors ate this twice a week without complaint. It filled the same hole a roast would have filled at a fraction of the cost. In most American homes in the 1950s, dinner was not a decision. It was a schedule. Monday was meatloaf. Tuesday was something from a can. Wednesday was whatever the butcher had marked down. Thursday was leftovers rearranged into a casserole. Friday was fish if you were Catholic and pancakes if you were not. Saturday was hamburgers or hot dogs. Sunday was the only meal anyone planned with any real intention. Nobody scrolled through recipes. Nobody asked the family what they were in the mood for. The woman running that kitchen knew what she had in the refrigerator and how far she could stretch it until payday. That rotation was not boring. It was a system built on knowing exactly what you could afford and making it last. The meals on this list came out of that rotation. They were never exciting. They were always there. Number 20, creamed eggs on toast. You hard-boiled half a dozen eggs, peeled them, and chopped them into rough chunks. Then you made a white sauce in a saucepan, the same one you used for everything else. Butter, flour, and milk, stirred until it thickened. You folded the chopped eggs into the sauce and spooned the whole thing over slices of toast on a plate. Some families called it goldenrod eggs because of the color. Others just called it eggs on toast and moved on. The meal cost almost nothing and took 15 minutes. It showed up on Friday nights in Catholic homes and on any night the grocery money had run thin. You added salt and pepper and maybe a few canned peas on the side, and that was dinner. Nobody remembered it fondly. Everybody ate it. Number 19. Wiener and bean bake. You sliced a package of hot dogs into coins, stirred them into 2 cans of pork and beans, added a spoonful of yellow mustard and a squeeze of ketchup, and poured the whole thing into a baking dish. Some families laid extra hot dog halves across the top like little logs. Others mixed in diced onion or a handful of brown sugar. Then you baked it until the edges bubbled and the sauce turned thick and dark. This was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was not in any cookbook. It was the meal that happened when a mother opened the refrigerator, found a package of Frank's and not much else, and reached for the canned beans on the shelf because she knew the combination worked. Every family had a version. The variations were small and fiercely defended. Some used barbecue sauce instead of ketchup. Others stirred in a can of drained pineapple chunks, which sounds wrong but tasted like summer. A few families in the Midwest topped the dish with cornbread batter and baked it until the bread rose up golden over the beans. Children loved it because it tasted like a backyard cookout served indoors. Parents loved it because the whole dish cost less than the gas it took to drive to the store. 1 package of hot dogs and 2 cans of beans fed a table of 6, and the baking dish came out of the oven looking like something you had planned all along. Number 18. Macaroni and tomatoes. You boiled elbow macaroni until it was soft, drained it, and stirred in a can of stewed tomatoes with all the juice, a pat of butter, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. That was the whole recipe. Some mothers added a handful of diced onion fried in the butter first. Others crumbled a few saltine crackers over the top. The dish came together in the time it took to boil water, and it tasted like something between a soup and a casserole. Warm and simple and slightly sweet from the tomatoes. This was the dinner nobody talked about because it barely qualified as cooking, but it showed up on tables across the Ohio Valley every single week. It was the filler meal, the one between grocery trips, the one that used 2 things every pantry already held. Number 17. Stuffed green peppers. You cut the tops off, scooped out the seeds, and filled each pepper with a mixture of ground beef, cooked rice, diced onion, and canned tomato sauce. Then you stood them upright in a baking dish, poured more tomato sauce around the base, and baked them for about 45 minutes until the peppers softened and the filling firmed up. The kitchen smelled like a church supper. Every pepper was its own self-contained dinner, neat and round and sitting in a pool of red sauce. Families in Ohio and Pennsylvania made these almost weekly because 1 pound of hamburger stretched across 6 peppers and fed the whole table. You did not need a side dish. The pepper was the bowl and the meal was inside it. Leftovers went into the refrigerator standing up, and the next day you reheated them in the oven, and they tasted even better because the rice had soaked up all the sauce overnight. Number 16. Tamale pie. This was not a tamale, and it was not really a pie. But nobody cared what you called it, because it disappeared from the dish before you could argue about the name. You browned ground beef with onion and chili powder, stirred in canned tomatoes and a handful of sliced black olives, and poured it into a casserole dish. Then you spread a thick layer of cornmeal batter over the top and baked it until the crust turned golden and pulled away from the edges. The cornmeal top cracked when you cut into it, and underneath was a thick, spicy, meaty filling that tasted like a tamale without any of the work. Church cookbooks across the Southwest printed this recipe so often the pages were stained with grease. 1 dish, 1 oven, no rolling corn husks, no steaming for hours. It was the shortcut that actually worked. Number 15. Ham and lima bean casserole. Leftover ham cut into cubes, frozen lima beans, and a can of cream of mushroom soup. You mixed everything together in a baking dish, topped it with buttered breadcrumbs, and baked it until the edges bubbled. The mushroom soup was the sauce, which meant you did not need to make a roux or measure anything beyond opening a can. Lima beans were everywhere in the 1950s. They showed up in casseroles, soups, and side dishes because they were cheap and available frozen year-round. Most children hated them. Most mothers served them anyway. This casserole was the dinner nobody asked for and nobody complained about. It filled the plate, it used up the ham, and it was done in 40 minutes. By the late 1950s, frozen dinners started showing up in grocery stores, and the promise was hard to resist. A full meal on a tray, ready in 20 minutes, no planning required. Swanson put a turkey dinner in an aluminum tray and called it a television dinner, and within a few years, the entire idea of cooking from scratch on a weeknight started to feel old-fashioned. The meals on this list did not disappear because they tasted bad. They disappeared because they took time, and time was the one thing the modern kitchen was designed to eliminate. A casserole that baked for an hour lost to a tray that heated in 20 minutes. A soup that simmered all afternoon lost to a can that opened in 2 seconds. The trade was speed for flavor, and most families made it without looking back. What they gave up was not just a recipe. It was the smell of a kitchen that had been working all day. Number 14. Swiss steak. The name had nothing to do with Switzerland. It came from the technique of Swissing, an old textile term for running fabric through heavy rollers to flatten and smooth it. That was exactly what you did to the meat. You took a cheap, tough cut of round steak, laid it on a board, and pounded it with a meat mallet until the fibers broke down and the flour you pressed into both sides worked its way deep into the grain. Then you browned it hard in a hot skillet, laid it in a baking dish, covered it with canned tomatoes, sliced onions, and sometimes a diced green pepper, and baked it for 2 hours or more. The pounding and the long braising did what money could not. They turned a cut of beef that would have been too tough to chew into something tender enough to pull apart with the side of a fork. This was the meal families cooked when beef was on the table, but the budget only stretched to the cheapest piece in the case. The tomato sauce thickened around the meat as it baked, and by the time you pulled the dish out, the kitchen smelled like something slow and honest. You served it with mashed potatoes and poured the thick tomato pan sauce over everything on the plate. Swiss steak was one of the most common weeknight dinners in America for decades. It appeared in community cookbooks from coast to coast, and church suppers built whole menus around it. Today, most people under 50 have never heard the name. Number 13. Ring bologna dinner. The butcher sold it in a horseshoe-shaped loop, and you brought it home and sliced it into thick rounds. You browned the slices in a skillet until the edges curled and crisped, then served them alongside boiled potatoes and sauerkraut from a jar. In the upper Midwest and parts of Pennsylvania, this was a standard Tuesday night. The bologna had more flavor than a hot dog and cost about the same. Some families simmered the whole ring in a pot of water with potatoes and cabbage, like a poor man's version of a boiled dinner. Others fried the slices and served them with baked beans. Either way, it was a meal built around a piece of processed meat that most grocery stores still carry today, but almost nobody thinks of as dinner anymore. Number 12. Codfish cakes. Salt cod soaked overnight in cold water, then flaked and mixed with mashed potato, a beaten egg, and black pepper. You shaped the mixture into thick patties and fried them in a skillet until both sides turned deep golden brown. In Catholic families across New England and the Mid-Atlantic, this was Friday dinner every single week. The church said no meat on Fridays, and salt cod was cheap and kept for months without refrigeration. The outside of each cake went crispy while the inside stayed soft and flaky. You served them with tartar sauce or a squeeze of lemon and a side of coleslaw. By the late 1970s, most families had stopped buying salt cod entirely, and codfish cakes went from a weekly ritual to something only grandmothers still knew how to make. Number 11. Hot dish, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas. Everybody in those states knew exactly what this was. Ground beef browned in a skillet, mixed with a can of cream of mushroom soup and a can of green beans, poured into a casserole dish, and topped with a layer of frozen tater tots. You baked it until the tots turned crispy and the filling bubbled underneath. Not casserole, not a bake. Hot dish. The name was regional and the loyalty was fierce. Church basements across the upper Midwest served some version of it at every potluck, every funeral, every Wednesday night supper. Some families used corn instead of green beans. Others added cheese on top. But the tater tots were the constant. You did not mess with the tater tots. That was the rule. Number 10. Shepherd's pie. Ground beef browned with onion and mixed with canned peas, carrots, and a pour of leftover gravy. You spread it into a baking dish and covered the whole surface with mashed potatoes, then dragged a fork across the top so the peaks would brown in the oven. 30 minutes later, the potato crust had gone golden at the tips, and the meat filling was bubbling up through the cracks at the edges. You served it with a big spoon straight from the dish. One scoop held everything a meal needed. Meat on the bottom, vegetables in the middle, starch on top. Mothers who made Sunday roast on the weekend turned Monday's leftovers into this without a recipe or a second thought. The dish stretched 1 pound of hamburger into a full family dinner that looked like it took an hour but needed 20 minutes of actual work. There is a moment after the children leave and the house goes quiet when you have to decide whether you are still going to set the table, whether you are going to cook a real dinner or just open a can of soup and eat it standing at the counter. That decision sounds small. It is not. It is about whether you still believe you are worth the effort of a hot meal on a real plate. The women who made the dinners on this list did not cook because it was fun or because anyone thanked them for it. They cooked because dinner was the 1 hour of the day when the family sat in the same room and ate the same food and talked about the same things. When the family left, the question changed. It was no longer what are we having tonight, it was whether to bother at all. The answer, for the ones who kept cooking, was always yes. Number 9. Baked spaghetti. You boiled the noodles, browned ground beef with onion, stirred in a jar or a can of tomato sauce, and mixed the whole thing together in a baking dish. Then you covered the top with shredded cheddar or whatever cheese was in the refrigerator and baked it until the cheese melted and the edges turned crispy. It was not Italian. No Italian grandmother would have recognized it, but it was everywhere in the American Midwest and South by the 1950s, and it solved a problem that regular spaghetti could not. It held together on a plate. You could cut it into squares and serve it like a casserole, and the leftovers reheated the next day without turning into mush. Children who refused spaghetti from a pot would eat it from a baking dish without a word of protest, because the cheese on top changed everything. Number 8. Salmon loaf. 1 can of pink salmon, a handful of cracker crumbs, a beaten egg, a little minced onion, and a splash of milk. You mixed it all together, packed it into a loaf pan, and baked it until the top turned golden and the edges pulled away from the sides. It came out firm enough to slice like a meatloaf, and you served it with creamed peas or a white sauce poured over the top. The dish sat somewhere between a meatloaf and a croquette, and it stretched one can of fish into a full family dinner. Coastal families might have laughed at the idea of canned salmon, but in landlocked towns where fresh fish never made it to the grocery counter, this was the closest thing to seafood on a Wednesday night. Number 7. Beans and franks. A pot of navy beans soaked overnight, simmered all day with molasses, mustard, and a chunk of salt pork, then served with sliced frankfurters stirred in at the end. Boston claimed the dish. So did every small town in New England and every lumber camp in the upper Midwest. The beans went in the oven Saturday morning and came out Saturday night, dark and thick and sweet enough to eat with brown bread on the side. Families who could not afford a roast served this as their Saturday supper for years running, and nobody called it a sacrifice. The franks were optional but common. They plumped up in the hot beans and split open at the seams, and children pulled them out with their fingers and ate them first. One pot lasted the weekend. Cold beans on Sunday morning with toast was not leftovers. It was tradition. Number 6. Skillet goulash. Ground beef, elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, and diced onion cooked together in one skillet until the noodles absorbed the sauce and everything turned a deep brick red. It was not real goulash, and nobody pretended it was. Real goulash came from Hungary and took hours. This took 20 minutes and came from the American Midwest, where Hungarian immigrants simplified the recipe down to what a working mother could manage on a Tuesday with 3 children underfoot. The paprika was optional. Most families just used salt and pepper and let the tomatoes do the flavoring. You served it straight from the skillet with a piece of bread to sop up what was left, and the pan was empty before you had a chance to think about seconds. This was the one-dish meal that needed no sides, no salad, no dessert. Just a skillet and a spoon and 10 minutes of peace at the table. Number 5. City chicken. There was no chicken in city chicken. That was the joke and the genius of it. You took cubes of pork, or veal, threaded them onto wooden skewers to look like drumsticks, rolled them in seasoned breadcrumbs, browned them in a skillet, and then braised them in the oven with a little water until the meat turned tender enough to fall off the stick. The name came from the fact that chicken was expensive in the industrial cities of the Midwest during the 1930s and 1940s, so butchers sold cheap pork on sticks and called it chicken to make it sound like a treat. Families in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit kept making it long after chicken prices dropped because the recipe was too good to give up. The breading got crispy, the inside stayed juicy, and you ate it with your hands like a drumstick, which made the whole meal feel like a picnic even when it was January. Number 4. Tuna wiggle. A can of tuna, a can of peas, and a white sauce poured over toast or crumbled saltine crackers. You made the sauce from butter, flour, and milk, stirred in the drained tuna and the peas, heated it through, and spooned it over whatever starch was on the plate. The name came from the way the peas rolled around in the sauce when you tilted your fork. Some families served it over biscuits, some served it over egg noodles. The version did not matter as much as the fact that it cost almost nothing and came together in under 10 minutes. This was the meal that showed up on tables across the country every Friday night in Catholic households, when meat was off limits, and the pantry needed to deliver something hot and filling without argument. Number 3. Ham loaf. Ground ham and ground pork mixed with breadcrumbs, an egg, and a little milk, shaped into a loaf, and baked with a glaze of brown sugar and mustard brushed over the top. The glaze caramelized in the oven and turned sticky and dark, and the loaf stayed moist because of the pork fat running through it. Ham loaf was popular across the Midwest and parts of Pennsylvania, and it was one of those dishes that split clean down a geographic line. You knew it from your mother's kitchen, or you had never heard of it in your life. Small-town butchers sold a ground ham and pork blend specifically for this recipe. You served it with scalloped potatoes or green beans and a tall glass of cold milk. Number 2. Chicken pot pie. Not the frozen kind in the cardboard box, the real one. A whole chicken cooked and pulled apart by hand, mixed with carrots, peas, celery, and a thick cream sauce, poured into a deep dish, and covered with a sheet of pie crust rolled out on a floured countertop. You cut slits in the top to let the steam out and baked it until the pastry turned golden brown and the filling bubbled up through the cuts. The kitchen smelled like butter and chicken broth and baked dough, and the sound of cracking through that top crust with a serving spoon was the sound of a dinner somebody had spent real time making. This was not convenience food. This was an afternoon in the kitchen that ended with one perfect dish in the center of the table. The frozen version that came later kept the name, but lost everything else. Number 1. Fried cornmeal mush. You boiled cornmeal in salted water until it thickened into a porridge, poured it into a loaf pan, and let it set in the icebox overnight. The next evening, you sliced it into thick slabs and fried each one in butter or bacon grease until the outside turned golden and crisp and the inside stayed soft and warm. That was dinner. A slab of fried mush on a plate with a pour of maple syrup or a side of fried eggs. Nothing else required. This was the meal that sat at the very bottom of the pantry and the very bottom of the budget. Cornmeal and water. 2 ingredients, cost next to nothing. And yet, when that golden crust shattered under your fork and the soft center steamed up from the plate, it gave you something no expensive cut of meat could match. It gave you the quiet proof that you could feed yourself with almost nothing and still sit down to something worth eating. Families across Appalachia and the rural Midwest ate fried mush for supper 2 or 3 nights a week, and nobody considered it poverty food. It was just food. The kind you made when the day had been long and the cupboard was nearly bare, and all you needed was something hot and honest on the plate. That is what all 25 of these meals have in common. They asked almost nothing of you except the decision to cook. And that decision, made quietly at the stove with a spatula in your hand, was never about the recipe. It was about dignity, the kind that does not come from a cookbook or a cooking show or a meal kit delivered to your door, the kind that comes from feeding yourself, simply and well, with whatever you had. Number 19. Liver and onions with gravy. Good Housekeeping ran it in January 1952 under the heading Thrifty Meals That Are Easy to Prepare. Beef liver cost 28 cents a pound in the mid-1950s, roughly half the price of ground beef. Pediatric nutrition literature of the era called it a superfood packed with iron and vitamin A. Mothers had scientific backing to serve it. You soaked the liver in buttermilk for 30 minutes, dredged it in flour, and fried it in a skillet with caramelized onions. A splash of beef broth in the pan made the gravy. The whole meal cost about 55 cents. It was mother's medicine disguised as dinner. By the 1960s, as families could afford better cuts, liver began a decline that has never reversed. The generation that grew up eating it swore they would never serve it to their own children. Most kept that promise. Cabbage roll casserole was a staple of frugal cooking, turning ground meat and rice into a filling dinner wrapped in cabbage leaves. Housewives layered seasoned meat and rice inside blanched cabbage, rolled it tightly, and baked the bundles in tomato sauce. The dish was practical because cabbage was inexpensive and abundant, especially from backyard gardens. Children were sometimes hesitant at first, but the rich tomato sauce and savory filling won them over. Adults appreciated the satisfying flavor and the fact that a little meat went a long way when paired with rice and vegetables. It also became popular at community suppers and church potlucks, where its hearty portions made it easy to share. Many cookbooks of the 1950s included cabbage rolls as an example of thrifty yet wholesome cooking. The casserole reflected the post-war trend of stretching ingredients creatively, turning humble produce into a centerpiece meal. Cabbage roll casserole proved that practical cooking could also carry comfort and tradition, nourishing families without unnecessary expense. Wiener Winks were one of those fun, no-fuss dinners that made kids laugh and adults sigh in relief. You would take slices of sandwich bread, flatten them out just a little, wrap them around hot dogs, brush with melted butter, and bake until golden brown. It was barely a recipe, but somehow it felt like a real treat. Maybe it was the crunch of the toasted bread or the buttery shell that made even a basic hot dog feel new again. In the 1950s, this kind of recipe was prized not just for its taste, but for its ease and presentation. It looked like something from a luncheon tray, but you could whip it up in under 20 minutes using whatever you had in the pantry. Some moms added cheese, mustard, or even a slice of pickle inside for extra flavor. But most of the time, it was just bread and a hot dog, baked into something warm and satisfying. It was simple, it was clever, and it reminded you that dinner did not have to be fancy to be fun. Number 21. Hash brown skillet with ground beef. This was the meal American men cooked when their wives were not home. It required no recipe and no finesse. Ground beef, diced potatoes, an onion, and whatever canned vegetable was in the pantry. You fried it all together in a cast-iron skillet until the potatoes were crispy. The whole thing cost about 80 cents. By 1955, Westerns dominated American television. Gunsmoke premiered that September. Wagon Train followed in 1957. Cowboy-themed recipes started appearing in women's magazines, and skillet hash got a new name: ranch skillet, cowboy supper, trail pan. The food was the same. The marketing was different. A man standing over a cast-iron skillet felt like something out of a frontier story, even if he was standing in a kitchen in Levittown. It was the only meal in the 1950s that men took credit for cooking. Everything else belonged to the women. This one, for some reason, belonged to the cowboys. Stuffed meatloaf with hard-boiled eggs was a showpiece dinner that remained budget-friendly while adding visual appeal. Housewives prepared the meatloaf mixture of ground beef, breadcrumbs, and seasonings, then placed hard-boiled eggs in the center before baking. When sliced, each portion revealed a striking cross-section with egg in the middle, making it both practical and eye-catching. Children enjoyed the surprise of seeing eggs inside their meatloaf, while adults appreciated the creativity of the dish. Despite its flair, it used only inexpensive ingredients, keeping it accessible to families watching their budgets. Community cookbooks often promoted it as a recipe that could impress guests without requiring expensive cuts of meat. It reflected the era's love for presentation, where even everyday meals were arranged to look appealing. Stuffed meatloaf with eggs stood as proof that thrift and creativity could go hand in hand, giving families a dinner centerpiece that felt special without costing much. Ranch-style beans with rice was a hearty plate that brought the spirit of the open range right into suburban kitchens. These beans were slow-cooked with chili powder, garlic, onion, and sometimes a little smoked meat or bacon, depending on what you had on hand. The flavor was bold and rich, and serving them over a scoop of fluffy white rice made it feel like something bigger than the sum of its parts. For 1950s families trying to make ends meet, beans were a budget hero. They were cheap, filling, and could simmer on the stove while the rest of the house ran its evening routine. The rice soaked up every drop of that spiced sauce, turning every bite into comfort on a spoon. Some called it cowboy food, others called it supper. Either way, it was the kind of meal that never let you down. Number 22. American chop suey. In Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, this was what your mother made when she had nothing planned: ground beef, elbow macaroni, and canned tomatoes in one skillet. It had no connection to actual Chinese chop suey. The name was borrowed to make plain meat and pasta sound like something. The real Chinese-American chop suey dated back to the 1890s in San Francisco. The New England version was a completely different dish that showed up in every school cafeteria and every community fundraiser cookbook from Boston to Hartford. 1 pound of ground beef at 45 cents, a box of elbows at 15 cents, 2 cans of tomatoes at 10 cents each. You browned the beef, added everything else, covered the skillet, and walked away for 15 minutes. Under 90 cents for the whole meal. Every family in New England had a version, and every family thought theirs was the original. It was the dish that proved you did not need a name for something for it to be the best meal of the week. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce were one of the most colorful and practical dinners of the 1950s, turning simple ingredients into a family feast. Green bell peppers were hollowed out, filled with a mixture of rice, ground beef, and onion, and then topped with tangy tomato sauce. Housewives loved this recipe because it was flexible. Leftover rice or vegetables could be worked in to stretch the filling further. Children liked the novelty of eating food served inside a vegetable, while adults appreciated its hearty taste. The peppers baked slowly in the oven, filling kitchens with a savory aroma that promised a warm meal. Many community cookbooks highlighted stuffed peppers as a reliable option for busy weeknights or potluck gatherings. The dish reflected the balance of thrift and presentation that defined mid-century cooking, using inexpensive staples in a way that looked impressive. Stuffed bell peppers became a dinner table favorite because they were nourishing, frugal, and just different enough to feel special without costing much at all. Eggplant hamburger bake was how you got something warm, filling, and full of flavor without using a whole lot of meat. You would slice the eggplant thin and layer it with browned ground beef, onions, tomato sauce, and breadcrumbs, sometimes with a little cheese in between if you had it. Then you would bake the whole thing until the top was golden and bubbling. The eggplant soaked up the sauce like a sponge, and the beef stretched just far enough to flavor the whole dish without stealing the spotlight. In the 1950s, eggplant was starting to show up in more American kitchens thanks to Italian neighbors and the influence of new cookbooks. It was cheap, hearty, and had a meaty texture all on its own, which made it the perfect partner for ground beef. This was the kind of casserole that worked with what you had and made it feel like more. It might not have been everyone's favorite at first, but once it hit the table, it always got scraped clean. Number 25, Welsh Rarebit. A melted cheese sauce poured over thick toast. That was the whole meal. In the 1890s, it was a fashionable dish served in silver chafing dishes at society parties. By the 1950s, it had moved from the parlor to the kitchen. Betty Crocker put it in her picture cookbook in 1950. The American version used Velveeta or processed cheddar, a can of Campbell's tomato soup, a splash of milk, and a pinch of dry mustard. You melted it all together in one saucepan over low heat. 15 minutes. The entire dish cost about 50 cents and fed 4 people. Your mother probably called it cheese toast. Your grandmother probably called it supper. It sat at a strange crossroads in the 1950s, a dish with a foreign name that any woman in America could make from 2 ingredients she already had in the cupboard. Beef and cabbage hot dish was the kind of recipe that felt both hearty and thrifty, the very definition of mid-century practicality. Housewives browned ground beef with onions, layered it with chopped cabbage, and baked it all together in a simple tomato base. The result was a filling casserole that stretched a pound of meat into enough servings to feed a hungry family. Children often wrinkled their noses at the sight of cabbage, but once it baked down with the beef and sauce, it became sweet and tender, blending smoothly with the other flavors. Adults appreciated how nourishing it was, providing both protein and vegetables in one easy pan. Church cookbooks of the 1950s often featured variations of this dish, reflecting its popularity across communities. It was affordable, convenient, and required only pantry staples, making it a dependable weeknight choice. Beef and cabbage hot dish was not glamorous, but it embodied the resourcefulness of the decade, keeping families satisfied on limited budgets while still delivering the warmth of a home-cooked meal. Old-timey chicken croquettes were what happened when you had leftover chicken and a little creativity. The meat would be finely chopped or ground, mixed with breadcrumbs, seasonings, and sometimes a white sauce or gravy to hold it all together. Then the mixture was shaped into patties or little cylinders, rolled in more breadcrumbs, and fried until golden brown. They were crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and always served with even more gravy or a splash of lemon juice. In the 1950s, croquettes were a smart way to stretch a small amount of chicken into a full dinner. They were neat, tidy, and easy to serve, which made them perfect for busy families and Sunday leftovers alike. Some versions had a little onion or celery inside, others stayed plain and classic. Either way, they had that old-school diner vibe, hearty, familiar, and filling. You would eat 2 and already be planning on heating up the rest tomorrow. Number 17, macaroni and cheese from scratch. Kraft had introduced its boxed version in 1937 during the Depression and sold 8 million boxes in the first year at 19 cents each. By the 1950s, both versions existed side by side in the same kitchens. The scratch version was the one you made for company. Elbow macaroni, a white sauce of butter, flour, and milk, and 2 cups of real cheddar or Velveeta, which melted smoothly and did not break. You cooked it all in one pot. The whole dish cost about 55 cents from scratch, compared to 19 cents for the box. That gap told you everything about the decade. The housewife who served scratch macaroni and cheese to guests and Kraft on Tuesdays was performing a quiet negotiation about what kind of cook she was and what kind of evening this was going to be. Shepherd's pie with canned vegetables was a thrifty adaptation of a classic dish, using pantry staples to create something hearty and filling. Ground beef was cooked with onions, then combined with canned peas, carrots, or corn before being topped with mashed potatoes. Housewives appreciated that it could be assembled quickly with whatever ingredients were on hand. The topping of mashed potatoes turned it into a full meal, stretching a small amount of meat across several servings. Children liked it because the familiar flavors blended together smoothly, making vegetables easier to eat. Adults valued it as a reliable dish that could be made in large batches, perfect for busy households. By the 1950s, shepherd's pie was firmly established as a comfort food in America, and the canned vegetables made it accessible to all families. It reflected the practicality of mid-century cooking, showing how convenience foods could keep traditions alive while still saving money. For many families, shepherd's pie became a dependable weekly dinner. Meat and potato ring mold was one of those dishes that lived on the edge between practicality and pageantry. At first glance, it looked like something you might see at a dinner party. Neatly shaped, carefully sliced, and often centered on a plate with gravy pooling in the middle. But the truth was, it came straight from a place of thrift. Leftover mashed potatoes and beef hash were packed into a gelatin mold, chilled, and then warmed again before serving. It sounds odd by today's standards, but back then, molded dinners were all the rage. They were seen as elegant, efficient, and impressive. The potatoes gave structure, the beef gave protein, and together they made something that could feed a family without stretching the budget. Moms loved it because it could be prepped ahead of time and reheated with no fuss. It was firm enough to slice like a meatloaf and soft enough to melt right into the gravy. Some families even dressed it up with peas, carrots, or tiny cubes of ham, giving it a splash of color and a little extra heartiness. It was dinner and display in one. It was one of those meals that tried to make leftovers feel like something special. And for a lot of households, it did exactly that. Number 23, Franks and Beans. In Rhode Island and Massachusetts, Saturday night meant one thing: hot dogs sliced into baked beans in a cast iron skillet. The tradition went back generations in New England. By the 1950s, it was made with B&M canned beans at 20 cents and Oscar Mayer Franks at 35 cents a package. You added a tablespoon of brown sugar, a squeeze of mustard, and half an onion. 15 minutes on the stove. The whole meal cost about 65 cents for a family of 4. You served it with B&M brown bread from a can, which cost 15 cents. Nobody in New England questioned it. Nobody tried to improve it. It was the same every Saturday, the way church was the same every Sunday. Your grandfather ate it. His father ate it. That rhythm was not monotony. It was the architecture of a life that did not need variety to feel complete. Macaroni and tomato hot dish was a simple but hearty baked meal that made regular appearances on 1950s dinner tables. Elbow macaroni was boiled, then combined with canned tomatoes, onions, and cheese before being baked until bubbly. Housewives relied on this dish because it required only inexpensive pantry staples, yet could feed large families. Children enjoyed the cheesy pasta, which was familiar and comforting, while the tang of tomato added a new flavor dimension. Adults appreciated that it was both affordable and filling, especially during busy weeknights. Many church cookbooks featured versions of macaroni hot dish, each family adding its own twist with extra spices or breadcrumbs. It reflected the casserole craze of the mid-century, where simple combinations of starch, sauce, and cheese became beloved staples. Macaroni and tomato hot dish captured the essence of 1950s cooking: economical, convenient, and satisfying without being fussy. For many, it was the definition of everyday comfort food. Frankfurter goulash was about as American as it gets. Hot dogs and elbow macaroni swimming in a mildly spiced tomato sauce, all cooked in one pot. This was not a fancy European goulash, but it did take a little inspiration from the original. The paprika and onions gave it just enough flavor to feel like something more than just leftovers tossed together. In the 1950s, families were busy and money was tight, so anything that fed a crowd without emptying your wallet was golden. Frankfurter goulash delivered on all fronts. Hot dogs were cheap, pasta stretched far, and that tomato base made it feel like a real meal. Sometimes moms would add a handful of frozen peas or a dash of Worcestershire sauce to punch it up. Other times it was just straight and simple, hot, hearty, and ready in 20 minutes. Kids loved it. Dads cleaned their plates. It was the kind of dinner that did not need a second invitation. It stuck to your ribs and warmed your belly, and that was enough. Number 24, skillet Spanish rice. In 1949, General Foods launched Minute Rice on national television, and overnight rice became a weeknight staple. Before that, rice took 45 minutes on the stove. Minute Rice took 5. The man who invented it was an Afghan-American engineer named Ataullah Ozai Durrani, who sold the process to General Foods in 1941. The army used it first, then the suburbs did. Skillet Spanish rice was 4 strips of bacon fried in a pan, the onion and green pepper cooked in the drippings, a can of diced tomatoes, a cup of minute rice, and a shake of chili powder. You covered it and waited 5 minutes. The whole thing cost under 60 cents. It was the first time most American housewives cooked rice on a regular weeknight without thinking twice about it. Before Minute Rice, rice was a Sunday ingredient. After Minute Rice, it was a Tuesday one. That shift changed the shape of the American dinner plate. Meatball and onion gravy skillet was one of the most comforting one-pan meals of the 1950s, made with inexpensive ground beef rolled into meatballs and simmered in brown gravy with onions. Housewives loved it because it required only a handful of ingredients yet tasted filling and satisfying. Served over mashed potatoes or bread, it became a complete dinner that could feed an entire family without stretching the budget too far. Children enjoyed the rich flavor of the gravy, which made even plain mashed potatoes taste special. Adults appreciated the way this dish transformed economical ground beef into something hearty and flavorful. Cookbooks often recommended it as a weeknight staple, since it could be made quickly on the stovetop without heating the oven. The meatball skillet reflected the practicality of mid-century cooking, which emphasized resourceful ways to feed families well. For many, it became a familiar part of the dinner table, a simple but memorable dish that carried both comfort and thrift in every bite. Canned fish curry was born out of necessity, but it became a regular fixture in many 1950s homes. The base was usually canned mackerel or sardines, broken into chunks and simmered with onions, canned tomatoes, and a mild curry powder. It was not spicy in the way modern curries can be, but it had enough warmth and depth to give the dish real personality. The smell would fill the kitchen fast, rich, savory, a little tangy, and it went perfectly over hot rice or buttered toast. At the time, curry powder was a novelty in most American kitchens, often marketed as an international flavor. This dish offered a quick and affordable way to feel worldly, even if you had never left your hometown. It was simple, satisfying, and used pantry ingredients that kept forever. For families trying to save money without falling into a rut, canned fish curry was a flavorful detour from the usual meat and potatoes fare. It was humble, yes, but never dull. Number 20. Creamed tuna on toast. Every Friday in Catholic America, millions of families needed a cheap dinner with no meat. The Catholic Church's Meatless Friday rule, which stayed in place until 1966, created guaranteed demand for this dish in cities like Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, and New Orleans. You made a white sauce in one saucepan, butter, flour, milk. You folded in a can of tuna at 25 cents and a handful of frozen peas. You poured it over toast. The whole meal cost about 55 cents. It was the same dish as creamed chipped beef, only with fish instead of dried meat. Children who grew up in Catholic households in the 1950s remember it as the taste of Friday. Some remember it with nostalgia. Some remember it with dread. Most remember both at the same time. The Meatless Friday rule shaped an entire generation of home cooking. When the rule was relaxed in 1966, creamed tuna on toast disappeared from millions of kitchens almost overnight. The dish had no loyalty outside the obligation. Creamed chipped salmon on toast was a thrifty mid-century twist on the more familiar chipped beef, made with canned salmon that was both affordable and shelf-stable. Housewives opened a can, stirred the fish into a creamy white sauce made with milk and flour, and poured it over slices of toasted bread. It was quick, filling, and dependable, especially for families trying to stretch budgets while still putting something warm on the table. The mild flavor of salmon worked well with the sauce, turning plain pantry ingredients into a dish that felt hearty and even a little special. Children often ate it without fuss, since the creamy texture made it smooth and comforting. Adults appreciated that it was inexpensive but still felt like a proper dinner. Diners and lunch counters also served versions of it, making it a recognizable comfort food across communities. Creamed chipped salmon on toast stood as proof of the 1950s ability to take canned goods and transform them into meals that could satisfy families at the end of a long day. Savory tomato pudding was the kind of dish that made people do a double take. Pudding, tomato. And yet, somehow it worked. You would take cubes of stale bread and soak them in a mixture of stewed tomatoes, butter, sugar, and seasonings, usually salt, pepper, and maybe a dash of vinegar or cloves. Then you would bake it until the bread soaked up all the juice and turned soft and custardy inside, crisp on top. It was tangy and sweet, with a flavor that sat somewhere between stuffing and bread pudding. In the 1950s, people were used to being creative with pantry staples, and this was a prime example. It was served as a main course in meatless meals or as a side for pork chops and baked beans. The combination might sound strange now, but back then, it was a regular part of the rotation. Tomato pudding showed up in cookbooks and school cafeterias alike, and it never failed to start a conversation. Sometimes the weirdest combinations are the ones that stick with you longest. Number 16. Corned beef hash skillet. Hormel introduced Mary Kitchen canned corned beef hash around 1950. It became the #1 selling hash in America and has held that position ever since. The skillet technique was simple. You pressed the hash flat in a cast iron pan, let it form a dark brown crust on the bottom, flipped it in sections, and cracked 2 eggs over the top. 15 minutes. Under 55 cents. Corned beef hash was what veterans made. It required nothing perishable. It tasted like the Army, like the Navy, like basic training. In the early 1950s, with 16 million World War II veterans still in their 20s and 30s, this dish carried an emotional weight that went beyond the ingredients. It appeared on diner menus from Maine to California as a blue plate special for under half a dollar. Pork chop with apples and onions was one of the most beloved sweet and savory pairings of the 1950s, frequently appearing in community cookbooks. Housewives pan-fried pork chops until golden, then simmered them with sliced apples and onions for a flavorful contrast. The apples softened into sweetness, while the onions added depth, creating a balanced dish that felt both rustic and refined. Children often enjoyed the sweet notes of the apples, which made the meal more appealing. Adults appreciated its simplicity and the way it elevated an inexpensive cut of pork into something memorable. It became a fall favorite, especially when apples were in season and easy to find. The dish reflected the era's tendency to blend fruit with meats, creating combinations that felt home-style yet slightly special. Pork chop with apples and onions stood out as an example of how American families in the 1950s used seasonal ingredients to create comforting meals that could stretch budgets without sacrificing flavor. Old-fashioned chicken fricassee was comfort food with a little bit of dignity. You would start by browning bone-in chicken pieces in butter or shortening, then cook them slowly in a silky white gravy made from roux, milk, and pan drippings. Toss in some carrots, celery, or peas if you had them, and serve it all over a bed of rice or egg noodles. It was creamy, savory, and warm in a way that felt like a hug on a plate. In the 1950s, it was considered a refined but affordable meal, one that felt a little more special than the usual casseroles or stews. It came from a long line of European country recipes, but was adapted into something uniquely American. Fricassee took time but not a lot of money, which made it perfect for slow Sunday dinners or when company came over. It turned inexpensive chicken cuts into something that felt luxurious. Kids loved it. Adults appreciated it. And there was always someone mopping up the last of that gravy with a slice of white bread. Turkey tetrazzini bake was a perfect solution for leftovers, a creamy casserole that turned Sunday's roast into Monday's dinner. Chunks of turkey were combined with mushrooms, peas, and pasta, all mixed in a white sauce and baked until bubbly. Housewives turned to it after holidays when leftover turkey needed to be used before it spoiled. Children loved the creamy texture and cheesy topping, which transformed what might have been a tired leftover into something new. The dish also carried a sense of elegance, since tetrazzini recipes had originally been associated with restaurant cooking. By the 1950s, cookbooks adapted it for everyday households, simplifying the method but keeping the comforting taste. It reflected the post-war love of casseroles, which combined thrift with convenience. Families found that turkey tetrazzini could stretch a small amount of meat into a full dinner, feeding many without extra cost. It was hearty, warm, and dependable, the kind of dish that filled bellies while still carrying a touch of mid-century sophistication. Mashed potato casserole with cheese and peas was the unofficial answer to what to do with last night's leftovers. You would layer mashed potatoes in a dish, top them with sweet peas, usually canned or frozen, and then sprinkle cheddar cheese over the top before baking it until golden and bubbling. It was rich and creamy, but also light enough to count as a full meal. In the 1950s, this kind of casserole was a staple on dinner tables across the country. It used what you had, wasted nothing, and tasted like something much fancier than it really was. Kids loved the peas, adults appreciated the convenience, and everyone went back for seconds. It was a true one-dish wonder, the kind of recipe you could prep in 10 minutes and have ready just in time for the 6 o'clock news. There was no fanfare, just warmth, comfort, and full bellies. Baked ham with mustard brown sugar glaze was the centerpiece of countless 1950s holiday tables, serving as both a celebratory dinner and a source of days' worth of leftovers. Housewives coated the ham in a glaze made from mustard and brown sugar, baking it until the surface caramelized into a sweet, tangy crust. The aroma alone filled homes with anticipation. Children loved the sugary glaze, while adults appreciated how the ham could be sliced thin for sandwiches or diced into casseroles after the feast. It was practical luxury, a dish that felt festive without being wasteful. Many families associated it with Christmas, Easter, or Sunday gatherings when extended relatives came together around the table. Cookbooks and advertisements often promoted glazed ham as a symbol of prosperity in the post-war years. Baked ham with mustard brown sugar glaze became an enduring tradition of the 1950s, embodying both the celebratory spirit of the era and the resourceful mindset that ensured nothing went to waste. Orange glazed pork chops brought a bright pop of flavor to the usual midweek meal rotation. You would start by broiling or pan-searing thick-cut chops until they had a good crust, then finish them off with a glaze made from orange juice concentrate, a little sugar, and maybe a splash of vinegar or soy sauce. That sweet citrus glaze caramelized around the meat and turned every bite into something sticky, savory, and full of unexpected flavor. It was the kind of meal that looked impressive on a plate, even though it was budget-friendly and easy to make. In the 1950s, recipes like this showed up in women's magazines and community cookbooks as a way to bring a little flair into the kitchen. It felt modern, exotic even. But at its core, it was a way to stretch a small amount of pork into something that tasted big and bold. Served with rice or buttered noodles, it was the perfect balance of sweet and salty. And it made an ordinary dinner feel just a bit like a celebration. Hot dog casserole with noodles was one of those simple 1950s creations that turned an inexpensive ingredient into a family favorite. Housewives sliced hot dogs into coins, stirred them into a creamy noodle mixture, and baked everything together until bubbling. It was an economical way to stretch a package of hot dogs into a full dinner, feeding several mouths with minimal cost. Children were delighted by the playful mix of pasta and sausage, while adults found it practical for busy evenings. It reflected the mid-century fascination with casseroles, where anything could be combined in one dish to save time and money. Many community cookbooks featured versions of hot dog casseroles, each household adding their own twist with cheese, peas, or breadcrumbs. The dish carried a sense of fun while also being grounded in thrift, making it one of the more memorable examples of resourceful cooking. Hot dog casserole with noodles captured the spirit of the 1950s kitchen. Creative, frugal, and unashamedly comforting. Beef tongue with raisin sauce might sound shocking today, but it was once considered a delicacy on par with the finest roasts. The tongue would be simmered low and slow until tender, peeled, sliced, and then draped in a sweet and sour raisin sauce made with vinegar, sugar, and spices. It had a rich, velvety texture that absorbed flavor like nothing else. In the 1950s, frugality and flavor went hand in hand, and tongue was an economical cut that delivered both. It was often served at Sunday dinners or special occasions, especially in households that prided themselves on nose-to-tail cooking. The raisin sauce gave it just enough sweetness to offset the meat's richness, turning something unfamiliar into something comforting. You could serve it with mashed potatoes, buttered noodles, or just a big slice of crusty bread. It was the kind of dish that asked you to be brave and then rewarded you for it. Oven-baked cod with Ritz cracker topping was a beloved fish dinner that felt indulgent without straining wallets. Fresh cod was placed in a baking dish, topped with crushed Ritz crackers mixed with butter and baked until golden and crisp. Housewives turned to this recipe when they wanted to serve seafood that looked elegant but required little effort. Children loved the crunchy topping, which masked the mild taste of the fish and made it more appealing. Adults appreciated the balance of thrift and presentation, since cod was affordable compared to other fish and crackers were always on hand. Community suppers often showcased this dish because it was easy to prepare in large batches while still impressing guests. It carried the comfort of baked casseroles while also hinting at sophistication, especially for families far from the coast who still wanted seafood on the table. Oven-baked cod with Ritz cracker topping stood as a perfect example of 1950s creativity, elevating basic ingredients into something memorable and satisfying. Spaghetti with anchovy butter was not something that showed up on every table, but it had a quiet little following in 1950s kitchens where grown-up tastes took the lead. This was not your classic red sauce spaghetti. Instead, it was hot pasta tossed with a simple mixture of melted butter and mashed anchovies. Maybe a little garlic, maybe some parsley. That was it. The anchovies melted right into the butter, creating a salty, savory coating that clung to every noodle. It was bold, it was briny, and it was surprisingly elegant for a dinner that came together in under 15 minutes. This was the kind of dish that showed up when someone wanted something adult, something rich, something with flavor that lingered. It felt like a secret, something too simple to be this good, but too good to keep to yourself. Scalloped corn casserole was a creamy, comforting side that often doubled as the main dish when money was tight. Housewives mixed canned corn with eggs, milk, and crushed crackers, then baked it until golden and firm. It was inexpensive yet filling, the kind of recipe that stretched basic pantry goods into something that felt hearty. Children loved its pudding-like texture, while adults valued its versatility since it paired well with almost any protein. At church suppers and family gatherings, scalloped corn was a dependable contribution, always disappearing quickly from the table. Cookbooks of the 1950s frequently listed it as a way to transform canned vegetables into something more appealing. The dish reflected the growing reliance on convenience foods while still keeping ties to traditional comfort cooking. Scalloped corn casserole was proof that simple ingredients could yield a dish rich in nostalgia, embodying the resourcefulness and communal spirit that defined mid-century American kitchens. Those were 25 dinners that used to hold this country together one kitchen at a time. Pick the one that brought somebody's face back, the one that filled the house with a smell you have not thought about in years. Put it on the stove this weekend, and tell me in the comments which dinner from this list your mother used to put on the table, or which one you are going to bring back first. If you have not already, hit subscribe, because there are more of these waiting. I am James, and I will see you in the next one.